Story 1. Rapture. It was early Sunday afternoon, and my parents were at church, leaving me home all by myself. They were devout Christians, I was not. Sometimes they even tried to get me to go, but it bored me to tears and just was not a believer. So there I was, lying on my bed, laptop resting on my stomach and headphones in my ears. I wasn't doing anything in particular, just browsing some of the new uploads from a few of my favorite sites, basically anything to pass the time. Then I saw a video that stood out to me, a beast eating a cactus. That seemed really interesting, but before I could click it, I got a Skype call. It was my friend Nick. "What's going on?" I asked as my standard greeting to all my friends. There was a faint sound in the background that I couldn't help but notice. It kind of sounded like someone was screaming. A woman. What's that noise? Why do you look so calm? Don't you even know what's going on? He answered, looking jittery. Every few seconds he would take a look to his left towards his door, then immediately in the other direction out his window, like he was paranoid. What the hell do you mean? I implored him. What's going on? Now I was starting to get curious, and as much as I hated to admit it at the time, even a little nervous. Look outside. People are going nuts. I took the headphones out of my ears, and that's when I heard it. Screams coming from outside on the street. My heart beat faster, and the adrenaline started to pump through my veins as I slowly got up out of my bed. I removed the headphone jack from my laptop so I could still hear Nick, and I made my way over to the window, splitting He blinds. All I saw was a blinding light that made my head throb with pain. Taking a few seconds to adjust to the light, I saw it. People running up and down the street in every direction like they were being chased. But it was hard to tell the difference between who was running away and who was in pursuit. What the hell? I cursed under my breath. Upon closer inspection of the house down below, I could recognize some of the people running. A bunch of my parents' church friends were down there. I'd met them before at birthday parties that my parents would drag me along to. Most of them were pretty nice. Then I saw a man dressed in all black with a tiny white collar around his neck. It was the priest. He had dinner at our home on several occasions, and if it weren't for the fact he was a priest, you wouldn't even know he was religious. We liked the same shows and movies, which is weird because it was tough to imagine a man of the cloth being into the type of same type of humor that appealed to me. I watched him for a few seconds. His skin seemed paler than usual, with cracks running all along it. He must be sick or something, I figured, because your skin will have to be pretty dry for me to see it from that far away, at least 30 feet. He just stood there looking around until his eyes locked on something. A woman was running down the street, and he intercepted her path, tackling her to the ground. He got atop her and looked like he was putting something in her mouth. But a second later, he violently pulled his hand back with something in it. I had to strain my eyes to properly see what it was, and I wish I didn't. It was her jaw. He had ripped it clean off her head. I wanted to look away. I really did. I just wanted to go back to my bed and pretend none of this was happening. But I couldn't. My eyes were locked on her, lying below him, writhing in pain on the floor as a pool of blood formed around her. He dropped the half of her mouth onto the floor and leaned forward, gouging her eyes with his thumbs before swiftly splitting her skull down the middle. Even over all the other screams coming from outside, the loud snapping of her bones could still be heard. That was it. I threw up, vomiting all the previous night's dinner onto the floor. At least I was finally away from that window. When I was finally finished, I made my way back over to my bed, Nick still sitting there. "Messed up, huh?" he said. "Oh my God," was all I could come up with. The screams ran through my head, but after a short while there was one less. I looked up at Matt as the background was now quiet as everything. "Shh, be quiet," he said quietly, cutting me off. He was looking towards I.'s door, and I put my headphones back on and began to listen intently. A very faint thumping could be heard that grew louder and louder, like it were footsteps getting closer. "Oh, no, it's my dad," he cried. The thumping grew louder until it stopped just outside what I assumed was his door. My suspicions were confirmed a moment later as a loud single pound could be heard. Matt sprang to his feet and went off, screened to the right, I guess to hide in his closet. The pounding continued until the door burst open, and his father stepped into the room. I couldn't see him in the frame, just his silhouette on the far wall. He took a few steps into the room. I could see him then. He looked just like the priest, pale and dry, with cracked skin. Walking over to Matt's computer, he crouched down and made eye contact with me. A chill went down my spine and I froze up. I couldn't tell if I was looking into his eyes or into a black void. A sadistic smile crept across his chapped lips, causing them to split between the cracks. "Hi," he greeted me. I couldn't really describe his voice. It was just a deep, unearthly sound. "W, what are you?" I'm sure he could hear the fear in my voice. "We are the end," he rasped. After he said those words, he turned his head towards the closet where Matt was hiding. The call closed, leaving me staring at the YouTube homepage. I tried not to think at what happened to my friend and instead reflected on what the thing had said to me. "We are the end." Those words played over and over again in my head until it finally occurred to me. Years ago, when I was a young boy, my parents made me go to church with them. There isn't much I remember from that, as most of the time I was bored out of my mind. But there was this one time, when the priest had spoken about the end of the world, that I vaguely remembered. He said that all those who believed in God, their souls would rise up to heaven. Without a soul, a body is just a shell, and a shell is always waiting to be filled by something. My front door opened, and I heard 2 sets of footsteps coming up the stairs. I guessed that my mom and dad were back from church. And for the first time in my life, I prayed, "Please, God," I sobbed, "let it be quick." Story 2. The Eyes of 22. I was a mailman. I got crates of mail twice a week on Monday and Thursday, and then I had to sort them and deliver it all on Tuesday and Friday respectively. All in all, it was a pretty simple job, and in general, I found that it helped to clear my head. I sorted the mail, took it to my designated neighborhood, and then walked around while I listened to music and shoved envelopes and whatnot into all kinds of mailboxes. The first street of the neighborhood started out fine. Added the first bunch of letters and counted down, because I started at the end of the street with the higher numbers: 30, 28, 26, 24, 22, 20, and so on. I had the world's greats trouble finding out which house was which because the inhabitants apparently thought themselves too good to put their house numbers in plain sight. Some numbers were skipped altogether. I managed to make it through, and when I was done I put the street behind me and moved on to the next one. The next time I arrived at the same street, I did my routine, started at number 30, and made my way down while being polite to the people I met and the kids riding their bicycles through the street. When I reached number 22 and I'd shoved the mail into their mailbox, I caught a glimpse of curtains falling in to place and a figure behind the window scurrying away as if they'd peeked out to see who it was. I thought nothing of it because it wasn't the first time someone had glanced through their window to check whether I was a burglar or a salesman. So I put it behind me and moved on to the next street. This continued for a few weeks. Every time I reached number 22 of that street I would just catch someone moving away from the window as I was about to move on to the next house. Then, after having been the mailman of that neighborhood for about 2 months, it started getting strong. Whoever was behind the window at number 22 grew bolder. Before, they would run off as soon as I looked in their direction, but gradually he or she stayed behind the window for longer periods. Time I still had no idea who it was because they always stood behind their curtains, the sheer type, just translucent enough to make out that there was a figure there, but not enough to clearly see who it was. After a while I grew frustrated. Everyone else in the neighborhood now recognized me as their mailman, and they all greeted me in a friendly way. Except for the people at number 22. They still acted as if I would break through their front door and rob them of their valuables and their lives. It was the first Tuesday of the 4th month, after passing by number 22 and seeing the man or woman staring at me, that I decided to react. I lifted my hand and casually waved while putting on the most friendly smile I could manage. The person stood still, and then he or she has gone. I didn't recall seeing them walk away, but the damage was done. My frustration with number 22 was born, and I knew that this was the one house that I had come to dislike above all hers in the neighborhood. I buried my frustration as best I could so as to not ruin the rest of my day, and I moved on with my route. On Friday I was fated to return. The street was empty, but everything else seemed the way it always did. Only this time, when I reached 22, the curtains moved before I even got to the mailbox. From the bottom left corner of the window, a pale, ashen face sly from behind the sheer curtains, and I froze. Empty, expressionless eyes set in deep eye sockets stared at me as if my soul was the next thing on the menu. The woman staring at me had long, dark, brown hair that fell around her withered face like straw, and she had bags under her eyes of a color I'd never seen before, a sickening blend of purple and dark green, as if she hadn't slept for months. Her mouth opened and produced a faintly audible, dry sound that filled me with a sense of danger. I could feel my consciousness slowly slipping away, and it wasn't before long that I was completely zoned out from reality. When I came to my senses, she was gone, and I can't tell you how fast I shoved the mail in the mailbox and practically ran away from the house. I briefly wondered if I'd hallucinated the whole ordeal and during that entire day. I thought I could see her dead, empty eyes staring at me from every window I passed by. The next Tuesday I approached the street with more th and a little caution as I reached the first house. I figure it would probably be best to get it over with as soon as possible. So I started making my way down the street faster than I ever had. 30, 28, 26, 24, 20. I stopped dead in my tracks and looked at the house I clearly recognized as number 20. My eyes flicked back and forth between 24 and 20, and I couldn't wrap my mind around what I was seeing. I must have been standing there for a while, because by the time I snapped out of my utter confusion, there was a teenage boy on a bicycle standing next to me. He looked up at me and asked, "Are you okay, mister?" while staring at me with a confused look. "I'm fine, kid," I reply, my voice trembling slightly, while I glance back at where number 22 should be. "I've got some mail here for number 22. Don't suppose you know where I can drop it off?" Before my very eyes I could see the kid's vibrant, childish expression change into the same dead and empty gaze the woman from number 22 had given me. The whites of his eyes filled with black, and his eyeballs seemed to visibly sink back into his skull. When the kid opened his mouth, a voice crawled out of it that ended like the screeching of the devil himself. 22 does not exist. Neither do you. He didn't say another word and just sat there on his bicycle, staring at me while I stumbled backward. It took a few seconds before my instinct kicked in and I ran away. I ran as fast as I could, and even when my legs became deadly tired, I kept on going until finally, out of pure exhaustion, I fell to my knees in the middle of the street. In my peripheral vision, I could see the curtains of every house around me falling back into place and shadowy figures scurrying away from the windows. In my panic, I hadn't paid attention to where I'd been going. But now that I was on the ground, I got a good look at where I was. Exactly where I had run away from. The boy's black, empty eyes got a good look at me, too. It was the last thing I saw before I found myself behind a window, peeking at people who passed by my door and scurrying away whenever the boy rode by on his bicycle. I recognized the street as being the same one I'd delivered mail to. The front lawn was all too familiar to me. The lawn of number 22. And then it all clicked. The window was the locked door to my cage, behind which I would suffer for all eternity while he drained me of everything I was. I had become one of many. Story 3. Unholy Hour. Perhaps you have heard the legend of the supposed holy hour that occurs on certain days of the year: Christmas, Easter, Good Friday, November 1st, and the 1st of both February and August, each day between 7 and 8 a.m., not including daylight savings time. Mind why? Because it is a human invention and supernatural entities do not observe it. When you were a kid, this was the hour in which you probably opened Christmas presents and started tearing apart your Easter basket after dragging your parents out of bed, and much to your parents' chagrin refused to eat anything but leftover Halloween candy from the day before for breakfast. However, more than likely you had never gone into a darkened room in preparation for this ritual. However, perhaps you've heard others speak of it. Go into a room with a mirror, preferably one without windows, between 7 at 8 a.m. on any one of the dates listed above. You do not have to perform this ritual alone. If you have any friends, you may in fact want them to come in with you to help you perform specific tasks outlined that are difficult to do in the dark. Important. The only light in this ritual must come from either a candle or a lighter, some tiny flickering flame. Save for this light, you must be in total darkness. Otherwise, there is a strong possibility that you won't see anything, hence the suggestion that you perform this in a room without windows. However, it all depends on your own sensitivity to the paranormal. When my friend performed this ritual last November 1st, we had to shut all the doors in the hallway first because the light from the door crack kept distracting him. Make sure that you perform this ritual in comfortable clothing. You want to avoid any unnecessary discomfort. Once inside this room, close the door and light your candles or your lighter. These flames must remain lit until the end of the ritual, although I know of people who have chickened out and blown the flames out, which instantly ends it and generally leaves them wallowing in their own cowardice for days on end. Afterwards, you may have your friend hold or light the candles or lighter if desired, as long as the flame is reflected in the mirror. Now, begin chanting some Christian prayer. Any one will do, even the sinner's prayer on the back of those chick tracts, as long as it mentions God, Jesus, or the Holy Ghost at least once. As you stare into the mirror, it must be the same prayer, and again, the number of times you need to chant this prayer varies depending on your own sensitivity to the paranormal, but generally 20 times is more than enough. My friend chose Our Father, and he needed to chant it 15 or 16 times. When you have chanted for long enough, one of your flames will flare and then change color, or ours turned red, but I've heard of flames turning blue, white, and even green and lavender before, a few seconds later, an image will appear in the mirror of the Archangel Michael. He looks a lot like the usual images of Christian angels, only he has this really nasty burn mark on the left side of his face. Also, he has really deep-set eyes. Bow to Michael. Again, it is important to make sure you don't accidentally put out your flame unless you wish to end the ritual. After you bow to him, Michael will ask you if you are entirely certain that you want to perform this ritual. I can't really describe the voice, but it's not the sort of voice you'd expect an archangel to have. It's kind of scratchy, and overall not very pleasant to listen to, and he has a faint accent of indeterminable origin. After you answer yes, Michael will explain the conditions of the ritual. He will ask you 7 questions, and if you answer at least 4 of him right, he will either allow or a conversation with a deceased loved one or give a living one immortality. However, if you answer 3 or fewer of them correctly, he will slit your throat and you will die right then and there. I'll admit that I actually do not remember any of the 7 riddles from when my friend did this, but I do remember that they were rather arcane, i.e., the type of riddles you would find in a riddle book, and he seemed to be fully aware of this. Also, if I remember correctly, each one consisted of 7 words. My friend never did well at riddles, so you can imagine that he didn't get any right, which seemed to amuse the hell out of Michael, as by the end of the ritual he had this big, terrifying Joker-like smile on his face. After you are finished answering the riddles, you only get 1 try at each, but he lets you think. Michael gives you the score. Again, if you answer 3 or fewer right, he smites you. While he smites you, he says something in the angel language, Enochian, I believe it's called, and you're left writhing on the floor in agony. My friend was screaming his head off when the ritual was over, and he started speaking in tongues. It was horrible, and I'm currently in therapy for this. Really fucking horrifying, but I digress. Anyway, the candles all went out, and the lighter he had me hold died. At the exact same time, I left the room feeling dizzy and passed out on my bed in my own vomit. Strange thing is, I woke up 8 hours later and went into the bathroom I performed the ritual in, and found no trace of my dead friend in there. Strange. I live alone, and all my doors and windows were locked. There was no sign of anyone having broken into my apartment. The landlady was on vacation, and no matter how hard I looked in the bathroom, I could not find a single trace of my friend's blood anywhere. A few days later, I got a call from his roommate asking about my friend. According to his roommate, my friend disappeared on Halloween night and hadn't been seen at all since. He had called all around, asking my friend's parents, siblings, aunt, uncle, people like the guy at the convenience store where my friend bought his cigarettes, and even his old teachers from grade school if they knew anything about his whereabouts, only to get a resounding no. He decided to call me because apparently I was the only person out of the people both he and my friend knew that he hadn't called yet. So I told him exactly what happened, down to my friend's body mysteriously disappearing. He didn't believe me and reported me to the police, but when the police came to investigate, they did not find any trace of my friend either, not even his DNA. It's almost like he never came over my house and instead chose to fall off the face of the earth and leave his friends behind. On a side note, I've heard that someone, in fact, by some miracle, did get all of T.H. he riddles right, and they wished for the immortality of whoever. However, the next day, their loved one was not alive. They, much like my friend, were mysteriously spirited away, only this time on the wall of their room there was a message in some mysterious language written in blood. Perhaps only God and the Archangel Michael know what has become of the two of them. Ed 2 and Collins, Story 4. Mommy sleeps in the basement. Speak louder, please. I put my hand up next to my ear from the back of the room, signaling that she would need to raise her voice. She took a deep breath. I could see anxiety turning her cheeks beet red as strands of blonde hair began to fall out of the same nappy ponytail she wore every day. There was something about her so familiar, but I just couldn't put my finger on it. With her face glued to the paper, too afraid to make eye contact, she quickly sputtered out, My name is Paisley Jackson, and this is my poem called My Family." Paisley was a shy little girl. In fact, she was one of the quietest students I ever had in my 10 years of teaching, which I guess being the youngest of 11 will do that to anyone. Surprisingly, she was very smart, unlike the rest of her siblings who were dumber than a box of rocks. Lord, the Jackson kids were such a headache, except for Paisley, of course. I just wish I could. They'd given her more opportunities to improve her future. Don't get me wrong, I tried to help Paisley, I really did. I gave her clothes, food, and even had funds lined up for her, but leave. Being dirt poor in a shack out in the middle of the desert was a bad hand to be dealt in life. Besides, no matter what I did, it wouldn't have made a difference. Everyone knows that the cycle of poverty is almost impossible to break. I crossed my legs, pen in hand, preparing for yet another bland story about a family I'd never get to meet. If you've ever worked with underprivileged kids, you'd know that guardian involvement is quite rare. When it came to interest in their daughter's education, Paisley's parents were no exception. I have two mommies, one named Betty, who can make good spaghetti. I call her Mom. She's the one that's married to my dad, Tom. One named Claire with pretty yellow hair. I call her Mommy. Dad calls her his project, his hobby being smack of in the middle of Utah. I've seen hundreds of polygamist families, so this didn't strike me odd. Besides, even though polygamy is illegal, I try to keep my nose in my own business. Mom takes care of us all. She can do that because she's so tall. Mommy wears a pretty silver bracelet. She wears it because she's so famous. Wouldn't be the first time I saw kids coming up YTH stories about celebrity parents to add excitement to their ordinary lives. I just didn't expect it to come from Paisley. Mommy has me and Tommy. He's one of my older brothers. Mom is a lot older. She has all the others. I cringed. That meant that one of Paisley's mothers had given birth to 9 children. I couldn't imagine going through that many pregnancies. Dad says me and Tommy are a gift from God. He'll never hit us with a rod. His pride and joy is Tommy. But he says the only person he truly loves is Mommy. I looked up from my grade book with the line about a rod catching my attention. However, this wasn't the first time one of my students have accidentally reported abuse. Truth is, CPS picks and chooses who they want to help. Mom is having another baby. She's mad Dad wants to name it Daisy. Mommy can't have no more kids. Her last one died of SIDS. Shifting in my seat, I scribbled down a note reminding myself to deliver my daughter's old baby clothes to the Jackson's shack. As a mother myself, I know babies can be expensive. Dad says she did it on purpose because she wanted to run off and join the circus. Mom says it wasn't her fault. High PR omised to keep that secret in me and her vault. I shook my head in sadness. How could someone blame a grieving mother for something she couldn't control? Mommy was the EO. Any dad shows he watched all of her school shows. They were joined in the night. Daddy says inside her is a lot of fight. Mom is just a cover. Dad doesn't really love her. I threw my hand up at jest. Your meaning stop. I had taught my students, but Paisley didn't look up. She continued to read, oblivious to my disappointed frown. Obviously, one of her siblings put her up to this as a joke. Mommy says she and he heads to get out. She wants to show me what life is all about. Dad gets mad. It's his biggest pet peeve. Mommy is sad. She just wants to leave. Mommy sings to me her favorite song. Mom says Dad's head is wired wrong. Shaking my head, I sigh. Another child with so much potential and such a kind heart was stuck in the middle of a lover's quarrel that didn't even involve her. Last birthday, I wanted to take Mommy to see her favorite basketball team. Mom made me a cake with frosted buttercream. I got to go see the Knicks, but Dad said he made a mistake he couldn't fix. Nothing is the same anymore. I don't know why for sure. Now Dad cries at night alone. He asks God, "What have I done?" To Mom he no longer tends. She hopes the baby will make amends. Paisley rose her head up with a smile, looking for my approval. Although I was appalled at the inappropriateness of her poem, I didn't want to break her spirits. She clearly was very proud of it, and holding her for something that wasn't her wrongdoing, was just going to send that little girl back into her shell that I'd been trying to break for months. So instead I clapped, making the rest of the class, who were too young to understand the gravity of the situation, applaud too. Mrs. June, I brought a picture of Mommy for extra. It's got one more part of the poem. Can I show the class? I nodded my head, thinking there couldn't possibly be any details worse than what she already presented. Paisley reached into the front pocket on her old worn-out hand-me-down dress, pulling out an old, aging photo. She flipped the flaking picture around, displaying it as if it were her most prized possession. My blood ran cold. I finally figured out why Paisley looked so familiar to me in what seemed to be a school photograph. Smiling ear to ear exactly like Paisley was a young woman by the name of Claire Daisy. She was a high school student, popular for her ability to gain the lead in every school play that went missing without a trace 12 years prior. She was last seen leaving theater practice late one night, but then she just vanished. No sign of a struggle, no witnesses, no evidence, no body, nothing. Her case was covered on every news station in Utah for a while because of how peculiar it was, until people lost interest. Paisley Tipley continued. I was so in shock I couldn't stop her as she read off the back of the picture. There is one thing I don't understand, and maybe you'll have the answer at hand. If Dad's love for Mommy will never sway, why did he treat her that way? Mom lays her head on a nice, soft bed, but Mommy sleeps in the basement under a big slab of cement. Story 5. Creepy Bridge on Mumbai EXP Restway. To begin with, I am Ankit Saxena, living in Mumbai, India. I have newly joined as a consultant in Capgemini. I am kind of an atheist and don't believe in any supernatural, but these past few days, there have been some incidents which have shaken my belief, if not shattered it completely, and when I am sharing this on Creepypasta, I am not putting a story, but a portion of my life, to have the answers which have eluded me as I believe on this. For there are many people who have faced similar situations in their lives and can really help me out. Now I would like to share the incidents, or rather some creepy incidents which occurred with me in these past few days. I live alone in a one-room kitchen apartment in a suburban area of New Mumbai known as Kapurkaran, this area being very far from my office. So we use transport facility provided by the organization for our smooth travel. It's nearly an hour journey, which goes from crowded city roads to a long stretch of expressway to my organization. On the stretch to expressway, there is a 200 to 300 MTR long bridge which is over a small stream of water which comes from the gulf between Mumbai and New Mumbai. This bridge ends with a toll booth and then the Western Express Highway. We have our working hours fixed at 9.5 hours every day. Failing to complete it means a negative point against you in annual grading or appraisal as we call it. This incident is from some 2 weeks back. On a Tuesday, I returned from a week holiday and I had a lot of work. Normally I leave office at around 9:45, but that day I stayed back to complete my backlogs around 10 o'clock. I was finished with most of my work, so out of boredom, I decided to go to a nearby mall or city for dinner, thinking that I would be able to return for the next bus, which is at 10:45. But unfortunately, I was able to return around 10:50, and I could see the bus leaving in front of my eyes. I inquired and got to know that there is still a bus left, which is at 11:15. I went inside to find that the bus was already there and boarded it. The bus took off at sharply 11:15. I was the only traveler. Other person was the driver. There was a cool night breeze, and I felt sleepy after a long day of work, so I dozed off. It was at around toll booth. When I got up, I looked at my watch, which told me it was around 11:40. I rubbed my eyes and leaned my head outside window to have the awesome view of the area from the bridge, with the town lights on one end and shining water from moonlight below. As we reached the middle of the bridge, I saw a laborer standing near a light post. I could see that he was completely drenched. As we were closing on him, I could feel that the area was rather cold, maybe because of water body below. I felt sorry for the laborer to work in those harsh conditions. As the bus was passing him, and he was just parallel to me, he suddenly took his head up and looked at the bus. I felt something strange about him as his eyes met mine. I can swear that I felt goose flesh going in my body. His face looked so devoid of expressions, almost lifeless. I took my eyes down, feeling sore. Why, for him, as bus crossed some distance, I turned my head back to see him, but there was no one standing there. I could very well see the whole portion of the bridge from that point, but he was not there. At that moment I knew that this was something different. I inquired to the driver, and he reacted as if it's a regular affair. He said in almost dismissive tone that it was one of the ghosts which people sometimes see on this bridge. For the first time in my life, I had my heart in my mouth. He further told me that it is believed that some laborers died during the construction of this bridge when an iron beam fell on them while working below it during monsoon season. Some of them fell into the raging stream, and their bodies were never found. The incident was shed up, but since then some people have reported sighting of these laborers, including the contractor who owned the contract of construction of that bridge. It is said that he was so terrified that he never returned back to the site, even for the ceremony when the bridge went operational. That night I had terrible nightmares all night long. Now this incident is of this Wednesday. I was asked to sit late that day by my manager as UAT user acceptance testing is going on, and unfortunately I had to stay that day also till 11:15. I boarded the bus, but my heart was already pouncing. I saw one more traveler with me, which was kind of a relief. There was a heavy rainfall, as this being the monsoon season in India. I had kept in my mind that I will not look outside my window during that stretch of journey. At around 11:50, we were on the toll booth. I was on the second seat. The other person was on the first seat, and he was sleeping. In fact, SNOING. The driver stopped the bus after just crossing the toll booth. I asked him why he has stopped the bus. He told me that he has to renew his monthly pass for this toll booth. I insisted that he should do it next day, but he told me that at this time there is no rush, And next day, he has an afternoon shift. When it will be heavily crowded, he took off from the driver gate B. Ridge was just 5 to 6 meters from where the bus was standing, and it was still raining cats and dogs. I closed my window as well as my eyes, while put on my earplugs, listening to Terry Gallion and New Hits, all from a Bollywood movie to distract myself. It was not even a minute when I felt that somebody was knocking. I pulled out my earplugs and saw a person standing below my window with his hand out, begging. I never wanted to open my window, because in back of my mind I knew he could be a ghost, but somehow I couldn't stop myself from opening it. He was just staring at me with his hand out. I took a 10-rupee note and said, "Take it quick, or the note will get wet," but he didn't took it. At the same moment, I was shook by the other person from the first seat. He asked me who I was talking to, and when I turned back there was no one. I told him what I saw. He was scared too. The driver returned, and I told him that what had happened. This time he replied with a serious look, and he said that he was not asking for money, but he was asking my hand. But he didn't told me what he meant. I asked him many times, but he never told me the meaning of his statement. Now I am frightened, as I have no idea what it means. Does this have happened to anyone else too, on that bridge? I am now frightened enough even when the bus crosses that place in daylight. If anybody has any experience or suggestions what this meant, then I would be very grateful. Story 6. Snow. A beautiful snowfall, the first since Kara had moved into the small, cozy house she had rented. It was in T country, and the perfect place to complete her online university classes, while also fulfilling her lifelong dream of becoming a starving artist, starving science fiction writer, specifically the elderly couple she rented it from, whose grandchildren she had babysat, had left the Midwest for a warmer climate after their retirement. They had taken pity on her as they knew that her mother, her only relative, had died of a drug overdose after many years of addiction. They allowed her to stay for next to nothing in exchange for keeping the property in order. For many 20-somethings living alone, any in such a big, secluded house would be boring or scary, but for Kara, who had previously only lived in cramped and filthy inner-city apartments, it was absolutely amazing. This is partly why she was so enchanted by the snowfall. Though she liked to fancy herself as a serious and solitary artist, the allure of the snow just drew her in. She bundled up and went outside for a peaceful walk through the beautiful scenery. A huge yard with a barn at one end and a small pond at the other. The quaint view, along with the peaceful silence that only snow can create, put H in a happy mood, and she was feeling very calm and happy by the time she came back to the house. Just as she stepped up onto the first stair leading to the door of the house, a movement in the snow caught the corner of her eye. For a reason she couldn't explain, her heart skipped a beat, and she felt the urge to run inside and lock the door. The feeling only lasted a split second, but it, too, gave her a moment to collect herself. She cautiously looked back at what had moved, and that's when she saw it. A tiny, pure white kitten, maybe 2 months old. She had to laugh at herself for being startled by such an innocent little creature. She glanced around for its mother, thinking of all the semi-feral cats living on the property. She didn't remember any of them having kittens, and in this cold weather they mostly took refuge in the barn or garage. Either way, this kitten was alone, and it was less than 30 degrees outside. She scooped him up and, almost on impulse, decided to keep him. She had never had a pet before, and could just picture him curled up beside her as she wrote or studied. The more she thought about it, the more she thought it was a good idea. Fighting the urge to name him after a science fiction character, she settled on the easier-to-spell Snowy. She was amazed that he wasn't freezing as she wrapped him in a blanket and rummaged through her landlord's cabinets for pet supplies. He must have just left the garage and wandered too far out in the cold. She found some cat food and watered it down for him. To her relief, he scarfed it down gratefully. She carried him through the big house and down to the finished basement where she lived. Furnished only with bookshelves of science fiction books, a bed, and a clutter desk, she thought the presence of a little cat curled up in the corner made it so much homier. All thought of studying or writing was lost for the rest of the day in favor of playing with her new pet. That night, however, she had trouble sleeping. She woke in the middle of the night and had the horrible feeling that someone was watching her. She laid there in silence with her eyes shut, hoping that if she didn't acknowledge the feeling, it would go away. It only got worse, however, as the night wore on. Her heart raced and she fought to keep her breath. Even hours later, she finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, but was still relieved when morning rolled around. Though there were no windows in the basement, it was as if a fog was lifted. The entire atmosphere of the room shifted during the night. The light snowfall had turned into a storm, and the temperature had dropped 20 degrees. Kara had no plans to go anywhere, but the knowledge that she couldn't be bothered her more than she had expected it to. She tried to write, but she just couldn't focus. After struggling for a while, she decided it was useless to continue working and instead rolled up with Snowy and sought some peace of mind in her favorite novel. This provided a measure of escape, but when night rolled around, she dreaded getting in bed. She put it off for as long as possible, but eventually exhaustion won out. She fell asleep easily, but woke up a few hours later just as before. This night, just as before, she woke up with an uneasy feeling. She was determined not to spend another night as miserable as before, so she forced herself to open her eyes. She slowly turned her head towards the center of the room and saw a pair of bright red eyes staring back. She wanted to scream, but was frozen with fear. Slowly and deliberately, she closed her eyes and opened them again. This time the eyes she saw were yellow and belonged to little Snowy. Whatever that was wrong with her, she still felt frozen with fear. Without thinking, she quietly said Snowy, and the cat immediately ran over and snuggled next to her in bed. She hid her face in his fur and tried to sleep, but couldn't do it. Eventually, she decided that maybe she just needed to get up and out of the basement. She got up, forcing the kitten to jump to the ground and groped away down the wall towards the doorknob. Though the room was near pitch black, she kept her eyes shut tightly. She found the door, but as her hands desperately roamed the frame, she didn't feel the knob. She forced herself to open her eyes. The knob was right in front of her. She didn't know how she missed it, but now she noticed something, an unnatural red light coming from behind her, instinctually not wanting to have her back towards the possible threat. She slowly turned around. The light was coming from everywhere, and from nowhere. It simply bathed the room. Snowy had jumped up onto a bookshelf and now jumped down. The shadow cast in the eerie light was not of a cat, however, but of a grotesquely hunched human-like creature. Kara forgot about leaving the room and stumbled backwards, pressed against the door. She was unable to pull together a complete thought. Terror held her in its grip. All she could do was curl in on herself, close her eyes, and repeat fragmented bits of the Lord's Prayer as the cat slowly and deliberately walked across the room towards her. But it was too late for that nonsense. It left the house only hours later, walking through the frigid temperature on icy roads, possessing Kara's body and holding a kitten, as the stray kitten had provided a way into Kara's life the stray girl would surely get through to another soul. It eventually came to another farmhouse, tears in its size, to tell a story about a car crash and a walk through the cold. Who could turn down such innocent creatures? Note. Thanks to Lucifer for what was possibly trolling in the prompts section. Satan as a kitten, indeed. Story 7. Karma. Entry 1. I made a terrible mistake. I thought I was just paranoid, but now I know it's following me. It's never going to let me forget about one stupid mistake. I'm not sure what it looks like. The only name I can call it is karma. I thought it would protect. Emmy, I was wrong. Let's start from the beginning. There's a rarely heard of ritual called the Judgment of Karma. For reasons we'll come to understand, I can't describe the ritual in writing. It's far too dangerous. I was told of this ritual. The basic myth of it is, after you perform this simple ritual, karma will judge you. If it decides you are a truly good person, it shall make your life a paradise. Otherwise, well, that's why I'm writing. It must have been a mistake. I really am a good person, or so I thought. I thought the ritual simply didn't work, but it became apparent fast that I was cursed. As soon as I finished the ritual and fled home, I found my beloved dog had been sliced open and had been laid out in my bed. I prayed to gods I didn't even believe in that this was the work of a regular human being. So far, I haven't been able to sleep in 3 days, regardless of how many sedatives I take. Every time I look out the window or at a mirror, in the corner of my eye I see a dark figure for a split second. Then as soon as I try to focus on it, it disappears. I hope writing this can help in some way. So far it's at least calmed my nerves. Okay, that's enough writing for today. Entry 2. I can't go to sleep. When I sleep it plans to kill me in ways so terrible I can't describe it. I almost fell asleep last night. My eyes were shut for 5 seconds. When I opened them I saw it. Karma was right in front of my eyes. It takes the form of a small boy with messy brown hair and wears poorly sewn together black rags from neck to toe. Also, his mouth had been sewn shut for reasons I don't want to know, and he had a look of shock and hatred in his tiny green eyes. As soon as I had looked up at him and had his image permanently scarred into my mind, he seemed to disappear. Frightened, I noticed a sharp pain up and down the skin of my entire body. I rushed to the mirror and found bleeding scratches that appeared to be from human fingernails all over my abdomen. back and legs. Entry 3. This is day 5 without sleep. To keep from falling into the trap of sleep, I've been taking adrenal energy pills and getting lots of caffeine. I began to get tired, so I've started the habit of making small cuts on my arm with the blade from a box cutter, each a centimeter from the previous one on my forearm each time I doze off. So far there are 8 cuts. They've been locked in my house ever since yesterday when I shopped for the supplies to keep me awake. If I go outside, I might accidentally share my misfortune with others. As far as the legend goes, anybody who concerns themselves by learning what the results of my endeavor may become judged by karma. That is why, when I've finished writing, I plan to burn my house down along with my computer, so what I've written can never come in contact with the internet. I hear somebody at the door. Entry for I've lost track of day and night. Last night, I think it was last night, I duct taped all my doors and windows so he can't watch me. I also took all the mirrors in my house and threw them into a large pile in the backyard before barricading my back door. I got very tired today, and the cuts that now cover my left forearm weren't helping. So I put an empty pan on the stove and kept the fire burning. Then I took a butcher knife from my kitchen and sliced off the pinky toe from my left foot. Then I pressed the hot pan against the wound to stop the bleeding. This was a small sacrifice to keep my life. Entry 5. He spoke to me. I can hear it whisper through the house. It speaks of a life before it was what it is. It was a tortured soul. At a very young age, whoever was raising him began to torture him in awful ways. They would whip him and sew his mouth shut. Every time he would sleep, they would beat him in new and more painful ways. To this day, he seeks revenge on every person who deserves it. I don't know why he told me these things, but I actually feel bad for that thing. That may be his point. I've been awake for as long as I can remember. I've cut off all my toes and the last 3 fingers on my left hand. I've burnt all the stumps to stop the bleeding, of course. Entry 6. I found it difficult to cut off my left foot. It was probably the most painful thing I've ever felt, but at least I won't sleep. I'm shaking as I'm writing THIS. Fortunately, I've always obsessed over grammar, so even that can't stop my writing. Recently, I noticed cuts along my lips that weren't there before. I think he did it while I wasn't paying attention. I think the worst thing about not sleeping is never having anything to focus on other than harming myself to stay awake. Entry 7. I can't believe I've gone this long without sleeping. I can't believe it. I can't believe it. This shouldn't be medically possible. Entry 8. I can't stop seeing it everywhere I look. I keep hearing it scream from below me even though I don't have a basement. But what's new is I hear somebody screaming threats back at it. It's the voice of an adult, probably the person who put him through this. I'm done. I've covered the floor of my house with lighter fluid. I won't give him the satisfaction of killing me. This is my final entry. When I finish writing this, I plan to burn my house down.